and said, "Thanks, Frank." Genovese knew that Costello alive posed a grave threat to him, and he heard that he was secretly meeting with the Lord High Executioner of Murder Incorporated, Albert Anastasia. Guns, ice picks, and strangling ropes were his stock in trade.
He was a tough, ruthless man, not at all like Costello, who was his good friend. If there had been a move against Costello with Anastasia still alive, there would have been a counterattack by Anastasia.
Genovese decided to strike first. The problem was getting to Anastasia. He lived in a New Jersey mansion, guarded by ferocious dogs and barbed wire fences, and always traveled with bodyguards. Genovese needed somebody on the inside, and he approached Carlo Gambino, then an ambitious Anastasia lieutenant, and convinced him they would both be better off with Anastasia dead. On the morning of October 25th, 1957, at 10:15 a.m., Albert Anastasia walked into a barber shop in Midtown Manhattan. His bodyguards parked the car in an underground garage and then took a walk. Anastasia closed his eyes and relaxed into the barber's chair. Two men in suits with scarves covering their lower faces walked up behind him. Anastasia was literally blasted out of the chair. Genovese now sprang into action. He immediately announced that he was the head of the family. And straight away, he turned on his old adversary, Frank Costello.
Costello knew what it meant. His time was over. His reign was complete. That if he didn't surrender or abdicate, he was going to be assassinated.
Genovese stripped Costello of all his gambling assets and interests in Las Vegas, Florida, the Caribbean, and New York. He only allowed Costello to live on the one condition that he get out and never be involved with the rackets again.
Costello sent a message to Vito Genovese, Don Vito, it's yours. You're in control.
Genovese had done it. He was now the boss of the largest mafia family in New York. But he was also in deep trouble. Blinded by ruthless ambition, he had ordered 2 hits on 2 mafia leaders without the okay from their governing body, the Commission. And he had done something else that some Commission members found uncomfortable. Genovese had also moved big time into drug dealing.
Genovese always thought that narcotics was a good deal for the mob.
Within the Luciano family, he was in charge of drug trafficking.
But Congress had recently passed tough new drug laws, and many mafia bosses were worried about the consequences. The mafia heads around the country now feared that Genovese was a loose cannon who didn't play by the rules. And his drug trafficking operations could bring the FBI down on them. To save his skin, Genovese requested a meeting of the Commission to explain his recent actions in New York.
The commission was not supposed to call another national convention, which would be held every 5 years for 4 more years. But Genovese insisted that the bosses from all the other families and the New York families had to assemble because of these important developments in New York, and he wanted it known that he was the boss of a family. So they picked the same place they had met the previous year. There had been a national convention in a small town in upstate New York known as Appalachian.
It would prove to be the biggest mistake of Genovese's life. On November the 14th, 1957, more than 60 senior mafia bosses with their advisors and bodyguards traveled from Cuba, Italy, and from all over the United States to a hilltop estate in a small sleepy hamlet called Appalachian. 180 miles northwest of New York City and far from the prying eyes and surveillance of the city cops. Appalachian was the home of mafia boss Joseph Barbera. His guests would include all the most powerful members of the mafia, like Joe Bonanno, Carmine Galante, Sam Giancana, and Joe Profaci. And at the head of the table, Don Vito Genovese.
Appalachian meeting was a meeting of mobsters from all over the country. Keep in mind that the mob, as we know it today, and as it was formed in 1931, was 100% controlled by the 5 families in New York. All the other cities were ancillary that answered to the New York mobsters.
But local detective Sergeant Edgar Croswell of the New York State Police had been watching the events.
The local police noticed something strange. All these out-of-towners and dozens of cars were pulling into one farmhouse in a remote area.
Croswell's suspicions had been aroused when he noticed that Barbera was booking up the local hotel. They'd also been tipped off by a local food supplier that Barbera had ordered 20 pounds of steak, 20 pounds of veal cutlets, and 15 pounds of cold cuts that day. Croswell had been keeping a close eye on Barbera, as he knew he had mob connections. He called for backup.
Well, we get the call, send as many people as you can to Appalachian. We have a thing going on.
Croswell ordered his troopers to surround the house.
We had a lot of people that they thought was the underworld, and we were to pick them up.
And when the guests got the news, there was blind panic. Some rushed to their cars. Others fled through the woods, ripping their silk suits against the brambles as they ran. Croswell sent his troopers in after them.
We saw one fella, he was standing on the back porch of a local house, but he wore a nice Homburg hat, and he had a nice overcoat with a fur collar. And we knew right away that he didn't fit in. We went in and took control of him and put him in the troop car with us.
Croswell and his men eventually managed to round up 60 mafia members, including New York leaders Profaci, Bonanno, Galante, and Gambino.
Everybody had the same excuse, that they heard Barbera was sick, and they all dropped in to see him, pay their respects.
Here you had this obvious convention of Italian or Sicilian American mobsters, and you couldn't dismiss it just as a casual meeting and the claim by all of them that they went to visit a sick friend. I mean, nobody could swallow that.
The Justice Department believed that at least 50 escaped, including Chicago boss Sam Giancana. As a direct result of Apalachin, a federal grand jury found 20 mafia members guilty of conspiracy to commit perjury and to obstruct justice, and imposed sentences of between 3 and 5 years. Eventually, these were overturned by the United States Court of Appeals on the basis of insufficient evidence. But the damage had been done. Genovese had awakened a sleeping giant. The FBI. All this changed after Apalachin. The FBI were galvanized into action. Hoover immediately commissioned a special report to confirm whether the mafia actually existed. It declared, "The truth of the matter is the available evidence makes it impossible to deny logically the existence of a criminal organization known as the Mafia, which for generations has plagued the law-abiding citizens of Sicily, Italy, and the United States."
After the Appalachian meeting, the intelligence gathering about organized crime became very much institutionalized inside the FBI. Most of the investigations were intelligence investigations, where we gathered information about who they were and the kinds of activities they were involved with.
As a direct result of the Apalachin raid, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was instructed to target Vito Genovese in their fight against drugs.
Open up! What about the government's charge that you're the right man, that you're the #1 man in this narcotics business?
Charges are fantastic and ridiculous.
You think
That's what they are.
And have you ever known anyone in the narcotics racket? Have you not known anyone?
I never did.
On April the 17th, 1959, the man who had gotten away with murder for so long was finally nailed in a Manhattan federal court. Don Vito Genovese was fined $20,000 and sentenced to 15 years in prison for masterminding an international narcotics syndicate that smuggled heroin and cocaine into the United States.
Never underestimate the menace that Vito Genovese left with even with his departure. It was he who was so instrumental, one of the key players in bringing in the scourge of heroin narcotics into America. Without him, it might never have occurred. He opened up these opportunities that the mafia would use widespread distribution into the inner cities of America, the biggest cities, New York, Chicago.
Vito Genovese continued to rule his organization unchallenged from his prison cell. He died there on February the 14th, 1969, of a heart attack. His legacy was that he left behind the most powerful mafia organization in America that bears his name to this day. The Vito Genovese family continues to make millions from its criminal activities. But he left another, more damaging legacy to the mob. Genovese had exposed the mafia to the FBI. The Apalachin disaster would signal the beginning